Hi everyone, and thank you for joining us this afternoon. It's Lone and myself. We're going to spend some time in the next hour talking about the work that we've been doing with KidsMatter and the Aboriginal project. So we're very pleased that you've joined us. This is a Zoom meeting, so it's a bit different to the other webinars that we've done, which is why we're still working out how to do things. The chat box is the way that we'll communicate. So hopefully you can see that button. It'd be great if you could, whoever's here, and Jeanette's already done that, to all panellists and attendees, I think you need to do. So click on to that to section, and all panellists and attendees is who you need to send it to so that everyone else can see. So as everyone could do that, that would be good. And Adrian's put the number there if there are any technical problems that do arise, that you can ring and get some support with that. But it would be good if everyone could just say hello so we know that that's all working, because we will ask you to use that chat box. So it's the all panellists and attendees section to click. Yep, great. All right, looks like that's working well, so that's good. We're off to a great start. All right, I'm going to get Lone to begin with the acknowledgement of country. So over to you, Lone.
Thanks, Lynn. Hi, everyone. Hey, Yolowa. Yolowa is hello in my language, Gungri. So I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the many nations that we meet across Australia. I see there's a wide range from everywhere, really, across Australia, particularly. I've seen WA pop up as well, so that was interesting. I'd like to pay respects to the elders, past, present, and future as well, for they always hold the faith and the future memories and retain the memories of our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander culture that we hold within this beautiful country. I'd also like to pay respects to any sorry businesses that are occurring, for any of the participants as well. I know in my personal life that's been occurring, unfortunately, but it's a fact of life. But yeah, thank you. I want to do a little icebreaker, and happy birthday, Dr. Lynn. I did say it before, but no one's going to sing happy birthday. Anyway,
no, they can't. They
I
can
got
only
it
say
wrong.
happy birthday. Through the chat.
Well, they can blog it. Yeah, they can type it.
I had been keeping it quiet in the office today, but I forgot that I'd actually told Lone the other day. I think I was complaining that I had to do a webinar on my birthday, and it came back to bite me big time. So that'll teach me. So thank you, and thank you to Jeanette and others who say happy birthday, and I'll just keep working. Could have a virtual cake maybe, but I'm not sure that we can. So thank you. And yeah, Jeanette's impressed that I'm here. I know. I do think I need to get better at avoiding working on my birthday, actually. I need to plan it like a year ahead, I think. Anyway, so thank you for joining us, and thanks to Lone for his contribution to this. So this is a presentation that Lone pretty much has developed based on his work with us this year. So Lone's been working remotely. So as people will know, APS are based in Melbourne, and Lone's in Brisbane, and he's been really working, doing all of our Aboriginal work this year, which has been really valuable to me and really important that we keep it happening. So I'm aware that the group that we've got joining us today are a lot of ECA people who will be familiar with the history of this work, and then others who, like Jeanette, who have been here for a while as well. But then I'm also thinking that this webinar will be recorded and can be used as like a transition tool for people to get a bit of an understanding of the work that we've been doing with a view to that, I suppose, still being used and the resources being understood and used as well as they can be. So it's a bit of a combination of a few different things. And it's a chance, I guess, for you to have some input as well. So any comments or suggestions you've got, and we will have a particular point where we'll ask you for some input, but other ideas or suggestions you've got as well would be really useful, so that we're including that in the mix as well. I'm just looking for my slides, and I'm not sure if it's working as well as I thought it was going to be, but anyway, it's going now. So Lone, do you want to just go through our learning outcomes, what we're hoping to achieve today?
Sure, thanks, Lynn. So obviously at the completion of the webinar, we'll discuss it's more of a reflection of of the KidsMatter Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander project as such. So it's more around about, I guess we come from a base that we're assuming people know around the project itself from the Indigenous aspect. And when I say Indigenous, I mean Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, even though this project more focused on Aboriginal people within Australia and the mainland of Australia. However, obviously some of those practices flow over to some extent to Torres Strait Islander as well, so I just want to acknowledge that. So basically, it's more around the learnings and recommendations for the continuation of the Aboriginal resources and how they'll be used within an operational context. And I'll provide an example later of how the KidsMatter Aboriginal resources have been utilised within a child protection sector in residential care, foster care. I have a disclaimer, and Lynn introduced me before. I also I work full time for an organisation called Mercy Community Services up in Brisbane. They extend all the way across Queensland pretty much. They do more family services, they do aged care, they do disabilities and things like that. But my portfolio is more within what they call the family sector, and that's more around children, Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander children, particularly in out-of-home care, residential care, foster care, and other programs. And that's how it's sort of why it was attracted to this job, because I love the resource. I'm not because I'm paid to do it. Lynn's on the screen. It's a birthday to keep her happy, but it was more around the practical application, because there's a big void, I think, around people understanding, accepting, and declaring. I always talk about that. There's 3 elements to that. I'll talk about maybe later. And it's more around a PD for our staff within Mercy, particularly not Indigenous staff, in terms of how to engage with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander young people, families and community, and our partners that we have associations with as well. So, yeah.
And I think it's really good that we've got that practical example, because one of the things that we've been trying to do for a while now with the animations that Lone will be talking about is trying to get some examples of how people have been using them. So we know we've done workshops and we know people have liked them and tell us that, but we don't always get the actual really good stories of how people are finding them and what they're actually doing with them. So it's a great example of that, I think, that we'll be hearing about today, which is really good. So let's keep you moving on, Lone, with sort of back to basics, I guess, in terms of social emotional wellbeing and what it is we're talking about. In KidsMatter, we're usually talking about mental health and wellbeing, and people that have been doing the Aboriginal KidsMatter work for a while will be really familiar with this kind of perspective. But perhaps you can give your take on it.
Yeah. In the slide there, the first paragraph, I think I'd probably read that first, around the social emotional wellbeing is referred to as rather than mental health. If you skip back up to the top where it's bolded, because Aboriginal people would, and myself included, I tend to see health as more holistic in itself. It's not separated. I cannot divorce the two, separate the two between mental health, physical health, my cultural wellbeing, the knowledge around that, and spiritual wellbeing as well. They're all one as far as I'm concerned. The other dot points down below is it talks about, and it's bolded for a reason, around your intention. Particularly when you're engaging with Aboriginal people and Torres Strait Islander people, is really knowing what you're intending to do. Be very clear when you're engaging, talking to them around your programs, your research, your funding applications or whatever. Be really upfront about it. Expect to be tested. I can assure you of that, whether you're Aboriginal or not. You'll be tested. They're going to test you on that. And your own knowledge, particularly around your understanding. Understanding by, I mean, you understand how Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, their practices and their protocols, and there's many different nations across Australia, First Nations, and it's not just one generic bunch of people. I can assure you, we're all very vastly different, but we'll stick to those protocols no matter what. So understanding, accepting that that's just the way it's always going to be. It has for thousands of years, and it always will be that way, despite the last 200 years or so of every attempt to change that, and also declaring, I think, to yourself that you do understand, accept as well. I do cultural awareness back at my own Mercy Community Services and some other programs around trauma-informed practices, and I always really stress those points because it's pivotal to drill down and to understand that before you go on to the next point, which is knowing why and when and how to use the resources in this context. So obviously, and we'll go through it after and we'll show an example, but when it depends on the local circumstances. Something might be happening, some sorry business or other events, cultural gatherings and so forth, or other community matters as well, and how and why you do it. How do you approach it? Who do you approach and why do you go to that person? All those really basic things. But again, to reiterate, you need to understand, accept those practices. People always ask me about the main thing around Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, and I think any Indigenous peoples across the world, but I've written there that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people's currency is based on the value of the relationship, and I cannot stress that enough because it's really, really runs deep. And I think like that any human race, but particularly with Aboriginal people, I know that for a fact, and Torres Strait Islander people. One piece of advice I always say to people is, small steps but often. It's an old Aboriginal saying from my country, so I always take that from the elders and always keep that in my mind. Don't jump forward. Just use little small steps. And I think when we go through the animations and even the resources that have been developed for this project, I think that's been undertaken from my understanding. I haven't been here since the get-go, but irrespective of that, I can sense and feel that. And I hear that in the guidance videos from the elders when they talk, so that's reassuring to me from a cultural and personal perspective. So yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Lauren. And when we, and certainly speaking from APS, but I know the other organisations in developing the resources, it was really important that we did make sure that we were consulting appropriately and that we were working as much as we could within in partnerships with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. And that, as you said, did bring its challenges at times in terms of expectations and what we needed to be doing, and particularly for me managing our animations project, the timelines are really tight, and we had a really fabulous budget to do the work, and I think that comes through, but the timelines were incredibly tight, and so managing the consultation process and doing that in a way that wasn't tokenistic was really quite hard. So I think the work is difficult, but it is important that it's done in the way that the best you can and with the best intentions, and it's good that it does look like it comes through. So I'll just want to spend a couple of minutes just doing a bit of a recap of the resources that were there. So people, again, who have been with KidsMatter for a while will be really aware of this, but I think the history of it and the context that in which they were developed is really important, and to see that they are about strengthening the KidsMatter framework. So KidsMatter Primary began in 2006 and didn't have any Aboriginal resources, and I came to KidsMatter in 2010, and one of the early things that I did that stands out for me was I spent some time with the Northern Territory coordinator at Yuendamu, which is 300 kilometres from Alice Springs, and it's a remote Aboriginal community, and we went up there and spent a few days going through component one, and the framework held together. So many slides we had, and I won't say how many because it was a lot. We didn't use all the slides, but the concepts really held up, and the framework and the ideas within it held up, and so we used that, and that gave me great confidence that it would work, and that the framework itself could be tailored, but it was also recognised that there were things in the resources that didn't speak to Aboriginal people. Some of the language didn't fit, obviously, and the imagery and the actual way it looked and felt didn't necessarily take into account Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander perspectives, or let people see themselves in the resources. So in 2012, that was when the Department of Health heard the questions that had been asked and decided that they would provide some funding to all of the organisations who are involved in KidsMatter, so us at APS, Early Childhood Australia and Principles Australia Institute, for us to develop resources that would be tailored to our audiences. So we each had our own processes of doing the work and our own consultants who we had connections with, and from there we actually went about and developed the resources that hopefully people will be aware of, and people have had a look at, people who aren't as familiar with them. So one of the things that we did in addition to the animations was a resource portal, and that's available with a whole lot of resources around policies and reports and research and a whole lot of different documents that are there that we try to keep up to date, and that's available. We also at that time developed up some changes to the programs guide. So the KidsMatter programs guide in primary and early childhood had a lot of criteria that programs had to meet in order to get into that programs guide, and one of the criticisms was that some of the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander specific programs didn't actually meet the criteria, so we were excluding them in that process. So trying to make it evidence-based in that process, we're excluding some programs. So we widened that out, and we did make it more appropriate in terms of being able to include Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander programs, but we don't have a whole lot in there because not all of the program developers actually want their program in the programs guide. So a lot of them were developed within a particular community or within a particular context at a particular time. And unlike some of the other programs that are in the guide who have a commercial focus and really want to be in the guide so that it's seen as a good thing and promote their program, a lot of the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander developers of programs didn't actually see that. That wasn't what they wanted. So, you know, there's still some limitations there, and that's one of the reasons, which is good for people to know about. We also developed up with Principles Australia some resources around trauma and resilience, and this was developed in consultation with the Catlin, who I can never remember what that acronym stands for, but it's Australian National University people who specialise in trauma and loss and grief, and so we did that in consultation with them as well as the consultants that we were working with, and Principles Australia had their processes as well to look at that. And that was because intergenerational trauma was coming up a lot in Principles Australia's conversations with schools. So they were talking a lot of schools that had high populations of Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander students, and trauma and intergenerational trauma was coming up all the time. So we developed up some specific resources around that. Early Childhood Australia also had a process, of course, of developing up resources, and these are some of them, just examples of the action charts and one of the e-books that are available, and they've got other, again on the website, they've got other resources as well, including some podcasts. And I think what Early Childhood Australia people have done, I don't know if anyone wants to comment on this, but have done a fabulous job of embedding these resources across a lot of the initiative. So whenever they promote anything these days, they're promoting the Aboriginal resources within the context of that as well, so that it's a real focus on embedding, which I think has been really important and really good. Principles Australia Institute's main resource is this supplement to the KidsMatter Primary Action Team Handbook. So this was a resource that was developed in consultation with consultants and schools, and really does outline what are the sorts of things that you'd be thinking about if you're going to be looking at working with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities. And there's also some videos that go with that as well. So that's, again, resources that are available with a specific focus on schools. And I think there's also, you know, information in there that would be really useful for probably for early childhood and health and community and families as well. But I guess the way we've developed them up, they're all kind of developed quite separately, but there's more links across them than perhaps we've really fleshed out at this stage. All right, I'm going to hand back to Lone again, and this is a bit of an activity. So hopefully you've got your chat open and that you can remember to do panellists and attendees, and maybe this is something that Lone, you might ask people to perhaps say something about first, and then you'll move into I guess your perspective around this.
Yeah, thanks, Lynn. Yeah, I think those resources from early childhood are good as well. Is there another table to go with that exercise, or? Yep, okay, cool. Thank you. So basically, the key themes around the Aboriginal KidsMatter project is based on cultural identity, resilience, and adults taking care of themselves. And I think they're three pivotal areas. So in this exercise, you can type in if you wish and make comment about it or whichever, but it's only an example. And I always I spoke before about understanding, accepting, and declaring at that stage. You go through yes, no, whether you understand each one of those respective elements. But I just find it sometimes simpler and I hope I do justice and articulate it well enough. As you can see on the left-hand side, there's cultural identity, resilience, and adults taking care of themselves. And I think every culture that does that, every individual. But I've broken it down to a non-Aboriginal person and Aboriginal and or Torres Strait Islander person on the right-hand column. Now, just to declare, my father's Aboriginal, my mother's non-Indigenous. So as you can imagine, my Aboriginal family is quite large and extensive and extended and a lot of kin and stuff like that. But, so is my non-Indigenous side as well. My mother is one of 17 children. So automatically you can think, oh my God, he's just blown out of proportion here. So it's not a racist view, I can assure you of that. But I just want to draw a comparison. So that in the middle column, in the cultural identity, I'm just trying to narrow, show or demonstrate how these views are perceived, I think. I know it's stereotyping to some extent. I don't mean to do that for any non-Indigenous people or Indigenous people, Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people, or generalising it. But it was just to draw a little exercise around it. And maybe go home and do it yourself as well, and have those three respective columns each, and those key themes of what you perceive as well. My mum, dad, they don't live in the air. She doesn't work in a bank, but I just thought I'd use that as an example. My mother does come from a low income. I come from a single parent family, and holidays, walks on the beach, I'm sure. Whereas my Aboriginal side, my country is Goonga, and I announced that before. Faced racism, loss of cultural identity, connection, and use of language. I don't use that language that much anymore, unfortunately. And I do like to walk on country and talk to my family, my mob, and being connected to my culture, and whether that's through language as well. Now, it's just to highlight a bit of disparity and understanding and trying to get around that understanding, accepting and declaring to those processes. So you can see that the contrast to some extent. I think I'm not saying that none of these people face racism and stuff like that, far from it, but for this purpose it's just a simple exercise. I don't know if there's any comments around that, or I won't be insulted, don't worry about that. Least of my problem.
Well, I think you're in a great position, Lauren, to tease those out, I guess, in terms of what you've just shared, and it's great to kind of see it coming to life, because these three themes, and people perhaps aware of this, but the three themes came to us when we were developing up the animations, because we needed to consult around what are the messages for families. So our resources were developed with a view around how do we support families, and how do we support with resources for schools and early childhood people to have conversations with families and understand families. And these were the three: cultural identity, resilience, adults taking care of themselves, were the three themes that came out of that process. So what are the things that will support children, Aboriginal, Torres Strait Islander children's social emotional wellbeing? And those were the themes that came out. So it's good, and I guess this is again where the resources can help us to tease out and make sense of it in terms of what does this mean for us, and how what might be the same, what might be different, which is what we also found in that process. And for me personally, being involved with consultants and doing that work, it was finding what's in common, and then how do you kind of sort of use that, but then how do you not kind of dismiss the differences as well? And I think there's some of the tensions that we find. So Jeanette's commented on that and thinking about the differences. So thanks, Jeanette. We'll leave the chat there. Thanks, people can continue to comment if there are things that jump out.
Just on that.
Yeah.
Just on that that previous slide, Lynn, too.
Yeah.
Like I said before, I work full time for Mercy, and I didn't say my title, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Engagement Officer. So, and there's a big focus on, a lot of our young people, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in care, or they don't know their cultural identity. They've been removed from their family for various purposes, legal particularly. So they're three key hooks that I like to hang our hat on, because when you break it down, itemise them out. That's what we're really trying to achieve at Mercy, and I think that applies whether that's early childhood, schooling settings, or whatever. They're transferable, those themes, and that's how I break it down. So, and I work through that with people, and I say, look, let's just drill this down and take a step back and truly try to understand what that means. So we have to come from a basis from a non-Indigenous view to start to learn about an Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander view as well. So I think it's a good, simple little step I ask people to go through. I go, I'm not going to embarrass you, but you just tell me what you think, what you perceive, and then we can have a chat about that and progress from there. But then I get to understand what people's perceptions are of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, and it opens up the conversation and dialogues a lot more.
Yeah, it's interesting to see, again, to hear how it's being used and taking beyond, I guess, what we originally intended them to be, and using them in cultural awareness training as well is kind of another step, I guess. So I guess the other part of the work that we've been doing this year, and Lone took a big role in this and did work with Principals Australia and ECA, so with Simon and Tracy, to develop up the key learnings. And this was a pretty big job, and in some ways I think it was good that Lone was fresh and new to the role and probably helped to tease some of this out and came in with a clearer perspective than someone like me who'd been doing it for a long time and probably getting a bit stuck in it. So this was part of a process of, I guess, this transition phase that we've been in for a long time with KidsMatter, and helping us to recognise what are the sorts of things that we've been doing that we would want to make sure that get carried through and don't get lost in the process. So it's about a way of honouring and valuing the work that's happened and reflecting on what we've learned and what we would want other people to start with, so that they don't start completely cold, I guess, or don't start from totally from scratch. So Lone, do you want to take us through these? And again, if people have got any comments or thoughts about this or other examples, feel free to add in the chat. And I'm not sure whether this will be new to people or whether it is something that you've seen before and are aware of. But again, there will be people that see this webinar that this will be completely new for.
Yeah. I want to acknowledge Simon Fewings from Principals Australia and Tracy Simpson as well from ETA. They contribute a lot of this information, and we combined that information when we requested it. I know they're both very busy people, respectively, so we really appreciate that. And then, like Dr. Lynn said, then that report was forwarded on to Beyond Blue about the key learnings, overall learnings from the project over the past few years. So we sort of broke it down into three real key questions, and the question on your screen, but this is a summary of those key questions and how it was broken down. So question one was ways that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander resources, animations, guidance resources in brackets have been used, and there were sort of little prompts to say what's worked well so far, whether resources have been originally used as intended, and those types of questions, just to help people bottom. And then the second question was, if your organisation had their time over again for this project, what do you think your organisation might do differently? And again, in brackets, little prompts to keep, to change, or to try. And you can see that highlighted on the screen at the end of each one of those statements. So we try to capture the essence of that. And then question three was suggestions for the future for KidsMatter project as a whole. So that was a bit of a combination of some of the things here, and also I think in the recommendations might be the next slide. So the usual suspects, and I knew this would come about even my relatively short period on the project, but what's worked was a better understanding around that holistic view, how Aboriginal people view mental health, and we talked about that before. Where am I to? Sorry, I was distracted. How the cultural consultants were engaged around the process. I think that was well done. As well, applying resource to the local needs, local circumstances, different audiences, why and how you're using it. Again, around that, all that intention stuff that I was talking about earlier. Local staff been providing info and support, and that was that more local level. They knew the circumstances within their local community or communities and how they would apply it accordingly. Obviously, data, I guess qualitative stuff. For example, suicide, and that's obviously, that always informs the future of decision-making process and so forth, particularly around developing an overarching Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander strategy. Obviously, expectations by government and non-government parties, and how the whole project and the respective resources were going to be rolled out, implemented, and utilised. So that was to change, and then also ongoing training support to project staff. So I guess all of us on the webinar, and including cultural consultants to be part of that co-facilitation, or even webinars like today, for example, where possible. So yeah, so that was an interesting process, I think, trying to capture all that information succinctly as well. And again, I think Simon and Tracy done a great job as well. So yeah, thank you.
So these are the key learnings. There were more, and part of the challenge was also bringing it out into core messages, wasn't it? Trying to make sure that it was clear and that we were making it positive in the framing and realistic in terms of what it was we were doing as a KidsMatter initiative, as opposed to all the possible things that could happen. So there might be some learnings that people are thinking extra ones that aren't there. So if you're thinking that, feel free to add them in, because it would be good to see that. And I guess we then had to kind of come up with, well, what do we do with those learnings? So that was where the next slide is really showing the recommendations that we then said. So this was very much about, well, what would this mean in KidsMatter moving forward? What would we be hoping that this might look like, and how do we really use this and embed it and bring it to life in a way that's going to really strengthen KidsMatter, and not be a strengthening process that's really kind of in many ways been added later. So moving forward with KidsMatter and into the new extended kind of expanded version where Mind Matters and other initiatives are included, what would we sort of be hoping could be considered as starting points or as core principles? So Lone, do you want to take us through those?
Yep. Sure. And again, these aren't exhaustive, but we've tried to extract the key recommendations that come out from the key learnings, obviously, that Dr. Lynn just spoke about. So obviously an overarching Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander strategy, and continue that in light of the new contracts and so forth. Would like to see, obviously, advocate for that. The guiding principles to be developed and supported by current best practices and future best practices on the horizon as well. I'm obviously experienced Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. I'm employed, leading the way, having decision-making process as well around that, and how to implement it and the future. And again, that comes back to best practice. I believe Aboriginal people are obviously best suited to make their own decisions and how to utilise these resources in this context at a local level. The key messages built within the framework, and I remember Tracy particularly, I think this is her point, within a culturally strong pedagogies, I should say, sorry. So really reinforcing that, allowing sufficient time, obviously, to learn, develop, and to grow, let it take an organic process, and also partnerships and relationships. That always takes time as well to evolve and be productive as well, and start to demonstrate some outcomes. So yeah, but it's far from exhaustive, that list, but yeah.
it was really which would be the ones that are pretty essential. And we didn't actually have a strategy. I think it's fair to say when we first started, we got the funding, and it was very much, as projects often are, very much driven by deliverables and what each organisation was going to do. And we had some sort of core principles, which are some of the things that we've been talking about. But really, there wasn't a real, there wasn't time, and it wasn't a priority at that time to have a strategy. So we really think that an overarching strategy that looks at everything and looks at the components and looks at the framework, whatever that's going to be down the track, and really builds it in, and a strategy that means it doesn't get lost as well. The point around employing Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people as well, I think is a really significant one that I think everybody felt quite strongly about, and for me that was really critical as well, because when we worked with our consultants, and we worked closely with them, and we co-facilitated a lot of workshops with them, but they really wanted to be more than consultants, and we had big discussions around what the language would be, and partners kind of was more comfortable for them, but it was challenging because it had been set up in a way that they were consultants, so the power sat with us pretty much. We were the ones deciding when we contacted them, how we contacted them, what involvement they had, and we tried to be as open and inclusive as possible, but for them it wasn't enough. They became very invested in the work with us, and it was over a number of years, and they were very keen, and for them it was their stories, which I think was the other part of this. It was their stories and their experiences we were drawing upon in developing the animations. Not that it was any one particular person's, but it was certainly drawing on ideas that they had and stories that they shared, that we then picked up some of those themes. So for them it was very personal. It was about their lives, whereas for us it was about a project and work, and I was always very conscious about that, and some of these challenges, I guess, for me as a non-Indigenous person managing the project were ongoing challenges, and trying to do what I could within the constraints of the project, but also working in a way that I felt was best with the consultants. So having people employed on equal basis, where people have an equal voice and are actually doing the work, is, I think, far preferable than having these power imbalances that are set up at the start. So, Lone, the next slide is really looking at the work that you've been doing, and helping again to give us a bit more perspective of and this is very much in terms of the audience of health and community, so people working in the community sector, but really bringing it to life in terms of how the connections you've been making with the resources, how it works.
Yep. Excellent. So, like I said before, my disclaimer is I work at Mercy Community Services, the Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander Engagement Officer, and then obviously part-time at APS as well within this role. But, and that's what attracted, like I said before, reiterate that, it attracted me, this type of work, because I could see the benefit in those, particularly all the resources and all the projects, or everything it had to offer. But I could see the resources, particularly around the whole principle, the whole nature of the project, and the resources, particularly around the cultural identity, the resilience, and the adults looking after themselves as just pivotal. Like whether that's parents or community families that we work with, or staff as well. When I mean adults looking after them as well, whether they're Aboriginal or non-Indigenous as well. This is how I sort of break it down across the programs. So we do a range of programs, to be honest, but we've sort of just ventured into youth justice areas, residential care, that's residential houses and so forth, and foster care programs. So obviously foster care programs and all those areas I just mentioned are over-representation, obviously, of Indigenous people, particularly young people. But with the foster care programs and the residential care, most of the foster carers are non-Indigenous people. They don't really quite have an understanding of how Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander people, particularly around their processes and protocols. I'm not defining everyone, but majority, unfortunately, they don't quite have that knowledge, that basic knowledge. And the residential care, a lot of the workers are non-Indigenous as well. So, whereas the youth justice, we have local Aboriginal people who do those programs. So that one's a bit different. It's a great community. So particularly for the residential and the foster care programs, like I said, you know, I show them these animations and they go, oh, wow, this is great. Like, where has this been all our life sort of thing? They just give short, sharp, simple little succinct messages, very subtle, and I think they're great. So within the Mercy Community Services, you know, probably like most of us, where we have some type of strategic plan. We have an overarching Mercy Community Services strategic plan, and we're developing one for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander strategic plan, and also have like a cultural readiness checklist, I call it. And that's more of an action plan and to gauge where people's level of understanding of Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander people are, and how they interact and engage with you know, Aboriginal people, families, communities, organisations, partners that we do some stuff with, or young people, whatever the nature of their program is. So along with the KidsMatter resources, there's also another suite of resources I love, and I always talk about them as well, as an organisation called QATSIP Resources. QATSIP stands for the Queensland Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Child Protection Peak. So that's like the peak body, the extension of the arm of the Queensland State Government. And they've developed a really, really great set of practice standards and cultural supervision. The practice standards are basically, they go through this process and they talk about how this cycle of, they just break it down into very simplistic language, but it's well written, and it's not dumbing it down for anyone, the audience. I think they've done a great job. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, this is just the way we are, and this is the way how we engage. It gives a bit of a snapshot and insight in how to undertake that process, but also it's really good, well written, I think, and developed and put together for non-Indigenous people to understand as well and follow that process around, you know, just simply engaging. And it's more premised on the narrative, understanding someone's story or their storyline. You know, that's a big thing for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, knowing who you are, who your mob are, your language, who your family are, you know, cultural understanding, things like that. So I think they do a brilliant job in that. So Mercy, we're implementing that across the various programs, so I'm really quite excited about that. The other aspect of that is, and it goes hand in hand with QATSIP practice standards, is the cultural supervision. Now, you cannot divorce one without the other. At Mercy, we have supervision. However, one of the first things I started that job 2 years ago was we'd like to see cultural supervision as well to, you know, attract and retain and support our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander workers. So that's a massive thing as well. And then, again, they've done a great job, I think, QATSIP. So if you want to look that up, by all means, I think I know their resources are online, PDF and stuff like that. Really jump in there and have a look. Thanks, Jeanette. You're on the boil. Thank you. So yeah, awesome set of resources. So like I said, in terms of operationally, we'll do that within youth justice programs. We want to do that within, well, we are doing that within the resis and foster care, start to do that as well. Even disabilities. And this is the beauty of the QATSIP stuff, you know, around NDIS, for example. That's one thing Mercy does, is disability services. So, you know, even though it's written within a child protection framework type wording, it's quite transferable. So you could break it down, and it goes through, and you know, the processes in terms of engaging, understanding someone's story or their needs and their wants, and changing that story to produce their outcome, and giving them ownership and responsibility. And that's a massive thing as well, obviously, and to own it and for their own responsibility at the end of the day. It's transferable, whether it's disabilities, you know, any type of service or education, for example. It's really simple stuff. So yeah. One of the other things we're doing too, and I want to invest heavily and draw in the APS resource, the KidsMatter resources, and really focus on the cultural identity and their resilience, is when we're doing the cultural support plans for our Indigenous children in care. because one of the legal requirements is there's supposed to be a plan developed for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander young people in care, and to do that. We're revising that, and I really want to hang our hat on that, those resources around cultural identity resilience, but also interweaving all those quad-tip resources and how to engage with young people, and how to get them ready for life and stuff like that as well, particularly within their very difficult situations in their personal life. So yeah. Also the KidsMatter resources are great for PD opportunities, again, for our staff, foster carers, like I mentioned before, around the animations and the guidance video and resources. And I think it just provides that reassurance. I think I love it when the elders are talking and the cultural consultants, and they're talking around, that they felt welcome, so that it puts it at ease. There's no this fake pretend stuff. I just felt that resonated, and it was coming through. So everyone was more relaxed and it was more genuine. So yeah, but the animations, like I said before, I think they're short, sharp, sweet, succinct, but a nice subtle message across each one of those themes. So yeah, or even multiple themes. It touches on each one. So yeah.
Thanks, Lauren. It's good to see that, as I said before, these resources are being used in other places, and are really being used to advance, I guess, the thinking and really complementing what's happening in organisations like Mercy. So it's really good to hear that. I didn't mention before about the guidance videos. So when we developed up the animations, we knew that there was a lot of potential for people to not necessarily be able to see all of the depth of the messages, and also that there might be some risks in people using the animations and seeing the animations, because it does capture, in essence, I guess, some of the challenges and some of the experiences of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. So we developed up, in the next phase, we developed up some guidance videos where the consultants were interviewed and included in there, and we really talked about the process that they went through. So I guess in terms of what we're saying around how you do this work and the importance of the process, that kind of spells it out a little bit. So it's useful to have a look at those if you haven't done that. Now, we thought it's a good chance to show one of the videos. We always love to show the animations, and for people who've seen it before, I'm sure you won't mind seeing it again, because they're always good to look at. And for people who haven't seen it before, then it's a good chance for you to just get a bit of an example of what they are. This is Nana's painting, and it's one of the 12 short animations that were developed. So Adrian, can you play Nana's painting? Thanks.
This is my Nana. She loves to paint. My Nana paints her country. She says even though she hasn't been back to her country for a long time, when she paints it, she remembers. Nana remembers being a little girl and living with her family on their country. She says it was a peaceful life and that there was not much humbug in those days. Everyone was happy and healthy on their country. They lived off the land. They didn't need takeaway then. They already had everything they needed. Then one day, they weren't allowed to visit their country anymore. Nana reckons it was sad. That's why she paints her country, so she can visit it again. Nana thinks about her country all the time. My Nana is a good singer too. She sings for her country. Sometimes Nana lets me help her paint. We paint the water holes and the sand dunes and even a cheeky dingo. Nana likes to teach me about her country. She says it's important that I know where I come from. Nana might be old, but she's still fast. Nana always saves the leg for me. People love my Nana's paintings. Even though she's travelled the world, Nana still keeps painting her own country. It's her job, she reckons. One day, I'd like to take Nana back to her country, back to where she lived when she was a little girl with her family. This is my Nana. She loves to paint.
Thanks, Adrian. And I'll just bring up our PowerPoint slides again. There we go. So hopefully people get a real flavour of that, and I guess it's a good example of what it was like for us developing those resources, where the consultants said that they really wanted us not to shy away from some of the history, and that was important, but at the same time to have positive messages that did promote strength and resilience. So I think Nana's painting is a really good way, a good one to show that, because it does show the history, and you could have a really interesting conversation around that, or you could be talking about a whole lot of other themes around the relationship between the grandmother and granddaughter. So there's lots of potential in there, but I think it is a good one that does show some of the complexity, I guess, and the layers of meaning that are throughout all of the videos. Lone, did you want to say anything before we move on to our sort of closing slides?
I probably should have made a disclaimer. It was remiss of me not to say that if there was any Aboriginal or Torres Strait people around the nature of that, or all animations, there's always a statement there around looking after themselves as well, and to raise things that, it was around the forced removal and things like that. And you said the cultural consultants also mentioned that, with the contemporary history and previous further back histories around forced removal of people from their country, their land. So, but that one, when you read the resources, that talks about the cultural identity. It's more of a focus, but I think it extends when if you ever want to open up a conversation with your colleagues at work or what have you, you could always say, well, what else did you get from that? Did you see the resilience that Nana also showed? Yeah. She was keeping her culture strong and her language, by singing, by painting, by hunting and gathering, things like that. So I just love those little subtle messages that come out. But also looking after herself. Nana looked pretty fit chasing that emu. So, and being on country, again, singing and that holistic sort of well-being, social emotional well-being as well around that. But yeah. But I think also there's many other things, particularly around relationships. Young people with older people, their elders and stuff like that, getting that wisdom and keeping that culture strong.
Yeah. You can see we could talk about these all day. We could just keep talking about this, and it's been great to, I guess, over the time I've worked with Lone this year, and I've worked with Sam Smith in the past, and to kind of see the different perspectives and the ongoing interest and capacity of the resources to be used, I think is pretty exciting and a really important part of I guess the legacy that APS will be leaving with KidsMatter. So that in conjunction with the other organisations' resources as well, it's a pretty meaty package that hopefully will be used and grown and developed as we've sort of had some examples of today. We are running out of time, and I know we'd like to keep going, and we're always open to a conversation if people are interested in following up on anything that we have talked about today. But I did want to also highlight that we have had previous webinars in the past. So the first one was a few years ago now, and it was developed when we first brought out the animations. So it has a few of us, me and a few other people on the panel as well, talking about those resources and how you might use them. So people, that's on the website, obviously, people can access that. And then we did one, I think it was last year, and it was around, again, using resources, and Tracy was part of this one as well, around reconciliation as well, and Reconciliation Australia were part of that as well. So there's other resources there that I think sometimes these webinars are on the website but can get a bit lost. So I just wanted to remind people about those. We also, this was some work that Sam Smith and I did with Sarah Kavanagh as well, and Carmen Naevolu, and we wrote this journal article looking at the process that we went through to develop up the animations, and this then was published earlier this year in the Australian Psychologist. That link I saw when I put that there, the link, you can't now access them for free. They had the articles for free. It was a special edition, and you could get the articles, everyone could download them, but it's not the case anymore. But if anyone's really interested in that article, I'm happy to send you a copy so that you can read that. But we wrote it in the it's sort of a reflective looking back space, so it was really trying to look at what are the actual culturally appropriate approaches that you would use in doing this kind of project work, and sort of looking back and reflecting on what it was that we did, and then how that might tie into what the literature tells you that you should be doing. So it was an interesting process for us, and a really important one that we felt did document the process, and again for the consultants to see. So I can see Jeanette wants that, so I'm happy to send that around. We've also at various times have written different articles and promoted what we've been doing on e-newsletters and social media. Our December last e-newsletter, we'll be looking at the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander resources and work, so that's something we're continuing to do, and I'm sure people are aware of that. Any final kind of comments, Lone, in the last couple of minutes that you'd like to share?
No, I don't think so. Probably in terms of the resource animations, probably chuck them into your favourites and watch those animations. Only short, sharp. You've got a spare few minutes, each respective one. So yeah, I don't think so. If there's any other questions, just email me as well, or Dr. Lynn, and we can take it from there. So.
Yep. Okay. And thank you, Lone, for your putting this together and your work, which I've really enjoyed. And we've got another one next Thursday. So we're doing this was an internal facing one, but next week we've got one the same time next Thursday for schools, early childhood services, and health and community people. And that's going to be a bit broader around the resources and thinking about how they might use it, and again showing Lone's example of how that might be used. So share that around, and if you want to join us again, you feel free to do that. We'll email a short evaluation form to you, because it's good for us just to get some feedback and also to report, as everybody knows, to Beyond Blue and the Department of Health to show what we've been doing. So your feedback on that would be really useful. And yes, I'll have a nice birthday rest of my day today, and thank everyone for joining us today. It's been